choice between good and evil is no choice at all. That's from Story by Robert McKee, and while screenwriters have followed this advice for the better part of a century, it seems that game designers have yet to catch up. When players are confronted with moral choices in games, they tend to be pretty black and white. You can either save the village, or you can sell it out to bandits. You can either give the little girl a piece of candy, or you can rip her heart out. Now, the theory at work, I think, is that when we immerse ourselves into a virtual world, then designers assume that we leave our morality at the door, and we can explore the consequences and logic of stuff that we would never actually do in this virtual world. But more and more I'm finding out that's not really the case. In reality, though they're called role-playing games, something where we play a role that is not our own, more often than not we tend to take our own morality and experience and insight into the games with us. At last year's GDC, Peter Molyneux essentially proved this point. He said, of the playtesters for Fable, which if you remember had pretty cut and dry moral choices, about 95% of the people who played were good all the way through. About 3% of the people who played tried to be bad at the beginning but found themselves getting morally revolted and then switched to good for the rest of the way. And only about 1% were bad all the way through. Despite the fact that the majority of games tend to involve us either shooting things in the face or setting them on fire or shooting them after we set them on fire, it seems like the majority of gamers have a pretty functional moral compass. Now, Molyneux went on to promise that Fable 2 would complicate the moral choices that Fable 1 so completely whitewashed, and he kinda did. There's several moments in Fable 2 where you have a choice between an obvious good and an obvious evil, but you're actually told by the game that you're going to be punished for doing the right thing. You can save this guy from being killed, this completely innocent guy, but you're going to lose a shitload of experience. Now that's a real moral choice, at least on paper, because it makes evil seem alluring and safe and easy, and there's no benefit to being good other than being able to be good, just being able to save the guy. He doesn't come back and give you a shitload of stuff. And without getting too deep into philosophy, that seems like a more honest and sort of forthright view of the way that morality tends to work. Evil is easy and safe and stuff, and good you sort of have to work at. The hardest thing to do is the right thing to do, typically. Now, Fable kind of drops the ball in that when you do save the guy, the amount of experience you lose ends up being completely negligible. It's like 2 XP or something, so the punishment doesn't really feel like a punishment. That's why I don't really dig Bioshock anymore. I mean, initially, the idea of saving or harvesting the Big Sister seemed like black and white and boring all over until you realize the whole thing about the atom. That if you save Little Sisters, you get less atom than if you harvest them. Doing the right thing is, again, harder. Then I saw a lecture by John Blow where he showed a graph that someone else had made that showed that by the end of the game, if you saved or harvested all the Little Sisters, the amount of atom you had was pretty much identical. So there was really no choice, there was no sacrifice, and that's kind of a bummer. I mean, I can understand why they did it, because I can see game designers thinking, well, it's not going to be fun if they only get to run around with about half the plasmid powers, or if we take away 3 of these guys' levels because he refuses to kill an innocent person. And, you know, there's a whole Hillary Clinton angle of what if this game is rewarding you to do the wrong thing. But who cares about any of that when you have the potential to honestly and interactively explore the consequences of good and evil and morality and choices and things like that in the way that no other art form can possibly do. Bioshock and Fable 2 have very interesting starting points for morality, but they don't follow through in the way that they need to. Now, of course, this isn't to suggest that the whole sacrifice thing is the only way you can correctly portray morality in a game. Derek Hughes' Spelunky, if you haven't played it, does a really good job of making evil seem very, very difficult but very, very profitable, while good is very, very easy but very, very unprofitable, unrewarding. That's just as valid, but the idea that there's an actual choice that has to be made rather than doing the right thing or doing the wrong thing, which is not a choice, that complicates stuff, and that's great.